Hybrid pods, a means for connecting Rapido libraries with libraries for using ALMA resource sharing. So what is a pod in the context of the resource sharing landscape? A pod is a group of libraries working together via shared terms. Terms such as delivery period, loan period, renewals, number of renewals, etc. Rapido libraries join the pod and the pod requests are exchanged automatically receiving these shared terms. Libraries also define the lendable items per pod. So as a lender, they only receive requests for the items that they define as lendable to this pod. An example of a pod that you might be familiar with today is the Australia pod, which works together via a 7-day delivery timeline, a 112-day loan period. They work reciprocally, charging no cost to one another. There are not renewals allowed in this pod, and the expiry time is 4 days. So, what is a hybrid pod, and how does it differ from um, the pod that I just introduced? Simply, a hybrid pod is a pod as far as the Rapido libraries are concerned, but it also allows ALMA resource sharing libraries connections with those Rapido libraries. The libraries will loan resources between the members of the pod using the predefined pod terms and the policies configured at the ALMA resource sharing library. Why use a hybrid pod? So pods function at their core are to connect libraries and to connect so doing using shared terms. And really, this helps build the resource sharing network amongst libraries. It allows you to connect with your partners for request fulfillment. You can participate as a lender and borrower in this landscape, and it allows you to meet your resource sharing needs at your libraries. The pods support more automated connections as opposed to manually adding partners individually to a request or doing holdings lookups. That is doable automatically via the pods. Also, working in a hybrid pod allows both groups of libraries to maintain their consistent workflows. For the Rapido libraries, they'll be able to process requests the same way that they're used to with their Rapido pods today, and the ALMA resource sharing libraries will be able to process requests and manage their workflows in the same way that they're used to working with their other ISO peer-to-peer partners. When I look at the Rapido landscape, I see that 86% of Rapido borrowing requests are filled by in-network partners already. A hybrid pod can further support request and library fulfillment via these in-network partnerships through building more connections that maybe you don't yet have with one another today. So after introducing hybrid pods, I think the next question is, how do we configure these pods? What's next? How do we get this set up? And the answer depends on if you're coming from a library who's using Rapido or a library who's using ALMA resource sharing. So for those libraries who are joining the pod via Rapido, there are 3 pieces that are very familiar to you from joining past pods. Um, as of note, you can join as many pods as needed to support your connections amongst your partners. The pod connections allow you to order your pods based on priority of use, which is one of the steps here. So for your borrowing perspective, you may participate in multiple pods to first use more regionally relevant partners and before expanding outward to the broader country or international. So for example, you might have the Southeast Queensland pod first, followed by your Australia pod, followed by the ANZ pod, then the international pod. For lending configuration, for the Rapido libraries for hybrid pod and pod participation is really just defining your participating items. So you can reuse already defined participating items and attach them to a pod, or if the loanable items for whatever reason would differ for a group of libraries than existing sets of participating items and existing partnerships that you have with libraries, you create a new set and attach it to this pod. A common example I see for libraries perhaps in the US is they're willing to lend media within their country, but then when they go to work with the international pod, perhaps the media would not be usable outside of their country, and thus they do not include media in their participating items that they attach to the international pod. So those are the 3 pieces for the Rapido libraries. Order your pods based on priority of use, attach your lendable items, and let us know you want to be in the pod. For ALMA resource sharing, there are different steps, and that is because the ALMA resource sharing libraries are using standard ALMA peer-to-peer ISO standard set configurations and workflows when working with their pod partners. So those aspects are setting up your peer-to-peer ISO partners or creating your partner records. You can download one another from the directory instead of manually adding each other. This will be really helpful. And really a first step for moving forward with the hybrid pod conversation is adding your library to the resource sharing directory. We pull the libraries from that directory to create the pod participation. So your library can benefit from that addition as ALMA resource sharing library by, instead of having to manually enter a partner, just selecting the copy action. What's also useful here is if a library needs to update their information in any way, a partner record downloaded from the directory will automatically receive those partner updates, as opposed to users having to communicate with one another that there should be an update and then depending on one another to make those updates. In addition to getting your partners downloaded and partner records created, you'll define workflow profiles for these partners. On the next slide, I've got a suggestion for what those workflow profiles look like. Additionally, you'll create a rota of the downloaded ISO partners. You'll define locate profiles. You'll create various rules such as your rota assignment rules and sending request rules, all things that are very familiar to setting up your peer-to-peer partners today. What's specific for ALMA resource sharing libraries joining the hybrid pod is that already acknowledged adding your library to the resource sharing directory is an essential step. You also communicate with us to have your library added to the pod, and you will also define and attach participating items. I'm going to show that here in a moment. But all of those resource sharing peer-to-peer components are documented, and I will link to those to you after today's session so that you can follow any documentation that you might need. And there's also my email address in this deck of slides for when we move to the place of getting libraries added into this pod. So moving to the next step, that is that shared step for all libraries joining the pod, and that's the participating items. Again, as a lender, you define your participating items so that you only get requests from those participating items for your pod partners. Rapido knows requestability and availability. So when you are defining your participating items, you are doing the requestability component of that. So the pod name, or sorry, participating items can be whatever is relevant to your library, and then the variables that you have available to you are material type, item policy, and location, and various operators for making your decisions. So what is an example of what that might look like? As a library, I'm defining my participating items as my lendable items. I've selected to choose them where material type equals book. I am including all item policies except for those that are not equals, not for loan, restricted access, temporary unavailable, and my location equals my main library general collection. Once I have selected add, that set of participating items will be in my participating items list. Then down below, I see my physical item lending policies area, which lists my different pods that I'm participating in. On that pod action, row action, I will select to edit, and then from the drop down menu that opens up, I can attach a set of participating items to the pod. Again, you can have the same set for all of your pods or different sets depending on what what is lendable from your library's perspective to your different pods. So when we think about the hybrid pods, hopefully you have enough interest at this point to still ask what's next? How do we move forward from here? And really, the next step, I see it as supporting your community with questions. So please let me know if there are questions that we can work through together. And then this topic really is in the hands of the community, for the community to decide if a hybrid pod is desired, if it would be one pod, if it would be multiple pods. No, we could do regional pods to support Rapido libraries being able to designate pod priority order. Again, a regional, a bit broader regional, countrywide, etc., for you to be able to list your pods based on priority of use. For those ALMA resource sharing libraries, Being in multiple pods is not additional configuration except for attaching participating items, but you would use your rota and your rota assignment rules for determining which your priority of use of your partners. So it's a community deciding if a hybrid pod is relevant to your community and of interest, deciding how many pods would make sense, and determining the pod terms. So one of the links I'll share today is linking out to the pods page, and you can see what those term definitions are and what is standard used there. Sometimes it can be helpful for a community starting the conversations about a pod to start with a pod that is familiar. So for today's conversation, perhaps the Australia pod, and then going from there to see if those terms are agreeable or if and in what ways they should vary for the community conversation. So I will share links from today's session and make those available to you. I'm also available via email for additional follow-up questions. Thank you.